First off, thank you so much for coming to the panel, and thank you for also coming to NakaCon, so it's not just a bunch of like 50 people in a room all together. I hope you guys are all enjoying your convention. My name is Spencer. I am hosting this panel known as the Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade Postmortem. No, it is Postmortem. I was like thinking, oh god, did I get like the really horrifyingly wrong word? So we are all here to talk about the hottest, least controversial JRPG of the year, otherwise known as Final Fantasy VII Remake. Also, spoilers will probably come up because, you know, it's kind of hard not to talk spoilers about, like, the entire game. But, yeah, we are about to get started with that. I'm just waiting for that to go away. Hopefully everyone good to hear me? Clear? Not too bad? Awesome. All right, so first off, Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. I asked a little bit before we got started, who here by show of hands has actually finished Intergrade? That is as hilariously low as possible. So just by chance, who here has a PS5? Why are you guys not playing it then?
14, man.
Okay, you know what? That's a job. I appreciate that and I understand that. I woke up and I chose violence and picked Yuffie over 14, but I understand. That's its own thing. Okay, that's like, I would have thought it had been the opposite. I thought more people had PS5s, less people played it. So I will try to tippy-toe around spoilers as much as I can, but thankfully there's not too many. So release info, just in case anyone wants to get nostalgic. And actually, fun fact and little story here, I was going to have this exact panel last year at NakaCon 2020, and it was the pre-launch hype panel. It was going to be a bunch of big sweaty nerds coming into a panel room and be like, woo, can't wait for Remake, it's going to be great. And then life decided to happen. And funnily enough, that did end up happening, but instead of being a big panel, it was literally like me and 4 people who worked at NakaCon staff at the year sitting in chairs discussing like, man, what do you think 7's going to be like? Man, I don't know, man. Looks wild. So I'm glad we were able to have this here. It is a very different situation, but I'm glad to at least have so many other, not only Final Fantasy VII fans here, but Final Fantasy fans in general. So thank you all for being here. And yeah, let's get started. So Final Fantasy VII Remake, believe it or not, released April 10th of 2020. And does anyone remember that like weird month delay we got like right before it was about to come out in March? And they're like, what? Hold on. We don't ever want to patch this game more than once, so we need to like push it back and like delay it for it. And it was one of those weird ones of like, well, we probably would have been more mad at it, but the fact that games were happening at all when the like quarantine and pandemic started, I felt like more people were just kind of surprised it still came out at all. Especially just because like we had seen a lot at E3 that year leading up to release, but even kind of leading into it, like there really wasn't that much info for it. And they were kind of vague in the sense of like, it was like, hey, it's not a long delay, but it's really needed for polish. Like it wasn't like 15. Does anyone here remember the 15 last minute delay of like, they had the big press conference to announce the September 15th release date. And they were like, nope, it's got to be November. And like, it was like, okay, that's really bad. But thankfully, this was more of just say, hey, we really want to get this right. This is our biggest game of the year. Avengers is probably going to tank our entire Western division, so we got to have something that makes money this year. And they at least had that. So it released on April 10th of 2020. And some fun things a little bit people didn't know is that it was developed on Unreal 4. Originally, it was actually going to be developed by by... oh my god, which is really funny because I have posters from their game right there. The guys who make the Naruto games, the Dot Hack games, why am I busting on their names? No. It's the... Yes, CyberConnect 2 were originally going to make them. So, hey, these posters now make sense. That's why I held them on for so many years. So, yeah, CyberConnect 2, I actually think is a really underrated developer. They are most known now for their anime games. They're actually doing the Demon Slayer game coming out next month. And they started originally with a whole bunch of other stuff. All old weebs might know them from Dot Hack, but they've been around forever. We desperately need a new Dot Hack game. But, yeah, so they were originally in line for developing this as the core developer. Does anyone here remember why they got kicked off of the team? So basically, Nomura was overseeing it more so as a producer than a director, and Nomura watching over the whole team with Arc System with CyberConnect was, okay, they had nailed the battle system, but they were taking so many liberties. They were trying to go really big, because one of the really interesting things about this release was that it has so many of the old core staff members. You have Katase, you have Nomura, you obviously have even like some of the people from like the writing, producing, and directing sides for it. And one of the big things they talked about of like, hey, we need to remake 7 because we're all getting old as hell and no one else is going to remake it as good as us, or at least to a way that they would feel happy with, which I appreciate. It's like, if I had to have Final Fantasy VII get remade, I would rather have the original creatives have as much of their hands in the pie as possible, which is preferred, or depending on your thoughts of how 7 turned out, preferred. By the way, if at any time while I'm talking, if anyone has a question or wants to ask anything, please feel free to fling your hands up. This is an open floor. But yeah, so it released last year, and then this year, Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade released exclusively on PS5 back in June. Oh my god, that was 3 months ago. Time is moving hilariously fast. And as I said at the beginning of the show, releasing eventually, and then because the news gods were very kind to me, the game is pretty much all but confirmed as getting announced this week as an Epic Game Store exclusive. So if you like PC gaming, yay. If you don't like PC gaming on Epic Game Store, I'm sorry, just wait, I guess. But yeah, so let's go with some comparisons really quick. Really interesting thing to note about this, if you actually subtract the development time from CyberConnect 2, Final Fantasy VII, the original and remake, were made in around the same time of a little over 3 years, which is really funny to think of how much is in both games and how different they are. Like, this team of the original PlayStation 1 is probably, if most, the size of, like, the art team, just because of how big the project is, how many more people are in it, how many more hands are involved in everything. But it's kind of so funny. It's very similar, actually, with the Final Fantasy 15 scenario. Of a lot of people look at Final Fantasy 15 and go, oh my god, this game was in development for like 11 years. But if you go and look at all the interviews, Tabata and the whole team were like, bro, when we announced it at E3 as 15, that's what the game was getting started as. It was not always Versus 13. And similarly with 7, if you go back to that E3 trailer, I always have to remember if it was PSX or E3, that original trailer, which probably had like this theme playing at the same time. Does anyone remember, or was anyone watching E3 live that year, E3 2015, when they announced Final Fantasy VII Remake? Oh my god, was that like the best part of your honeymoon? Like, I was watching that in a theater with a whole bunch of other people, because at the time Sony had done their press conferences in theater setups, and being in a large theater, watching that on a huge like 80-inch screen surrounded by a bunch of other like people, was just the craziest, most surreal thing ever. Because it was like, that was the same year as like Shenmue and like The Last Guardian. So we were all just like creaming our pants the whole time next to each other. Like nobody knew what was going on. You left that theater like, what year is this? And then hilariously having to wait longer for it to come out. Because we went from like a lot of information at announcement, because 6 months later we saw gameplay at PSX that year. They were off to a really strong start, but then once they kind of switched over developers, we almost went like 3 years really without hearing anything, which was the smart move in the end, because if you look at that original announcement to the finished game, they're very different. And actually, a fun fact that people don't really talk about or know at the time, that original version of the Final Fantasy VII Remake by CyberConnect, that had already had voice acting done that's still in the present game, but they hadn't recasted the main cast yet. So I think it's, I always forget his name, but the original voice of Cloud, Tifa, Barrett, and Sephiroth and all of them were all their originals from Advent Children. They had come in, they had done some work, but for whatever reason, and I would love to know the story behind this one day, even though it'll probably never happen, Square Enix Japan was like, nah, we got to get new voices, which it sucks, because I think if you're here, you probably are nostalgic for those original voices, whether it be from Kingdom Hearts or Advent Children or even just like something like Crisis Core. But I think in the long run, especially looking at what they were trying to accomplish with getting new people into Final Fantasy VII, I really like the direction they did with the new cast. Is anyone in the boat of like, I wish they brought all the originals back, or?
Well, they were trying to appeal to the Advent fans with the design.
Yes. See, but I think if they had committed, it would have made more sense. Because in Japan, that's 100% the case. In Japan, it's all the original cast. No one changed unless someone was dead. I don't know. But the main cast is everyone from that original Japanese dub. So that's what's kind of so interesting about like Japan not wanting to keep the consistency. And I think for the diehards, it's really easy to be like, oh, I wish they were still there. And I know even some of the actors were like kind of pissed about it. Of like, hey, this is our character. Why are you changing them? But it had been so long. Final Fantasy VII was like an over 20-year-old game even at that point in the development. I think the amount of people in the long run who are coming to it for Cloud's English voice are very low in comparison to people who might be willing to come into this remake with a fresh slate, which is then extra hilarious when you realize how I can only... like if so, actually, here's a great question I should ask. Who has only played Final Fantasy VII and never played the original? Okay, does anyone want to like share, like, are you like, was this one of those moments of like, what the hell was this original game like? Like, were you just super lost? Like, where were your heads at?
I watched gameplay already on YouTube first.
Well, it's like, I think looking at gameplay is one thing, but like, mostly story. Like, when you get to the ghosts, are you like, wait, what the, where are the ghosts in this game? But, oh yeah, you want to say something? Yeah, I mean, the getting lost, though, I think was almost one of those, like, really common things with back then, especially because of how heavy the pre-rendered backgrounds were for the original 7. Like, if you all, like, who remembers what the select button does in FF7? It is the where the fuck am I on the map button. It's like, you're here, buddy. You're right here. I know it looks like a blob of pixels, but that's a bar. You're in the bar right now. So... yeah, going back to our comparison here, though, so originally developed in a very similar time frame, and with Remake, I think they had announced it maybe like 2008 or 2018, 2019, that they were like, hey, it's not going to be the whole game. And I think that was actually really smart of them to come out and be like, hey, prepare yourself. Like, don't think when you're buying this game it's going to be the full thing at launch, which I think them saying it at the time was definitely, and even still to this day, there are a lot of people who are like, I only want to play this when it's the full game. But I think when you have to like talk about it realistically, it's like there's no amount of time I think like they could have given themselves to remake in the way 7 Remake plays now, the full thing from beginning to end. Like that would have been like a 10, 20-year game development just because of how big it is. And another thing Nomura was really big on, and Katase as well, is they don't want to cut something if it's pivotal to the story. And I'm sure there will be things from the original 7 that are cut, but their big thing with it was like, hey, if we're remaking this and we cut out something like whatever, like whether it be a small town, Cosmo Canyon, or like Golden Saucer, like if you even cut one minigame out of like Golden Saucer, I'm sure someone's going to be like, that's my favorite minigame. What are you doing? So they're in this weird position of like, they have to break it up to be able to sell it eventually. And they had really, the only challenge was, at the end of the day, when you roll credits on part 1, will it feel like a satisfying game and not, oh my god, I just got sold like a third of a game or whatever. By show of hands, who here felt that when you rolled credits on Remake that you had a satisfying game experience? Who here felt disappointed, like, oh my god, I wish there was more? Okay, so it's like kind of fit. Leaving as soon as you leave Midgar is like the perfect cock tease, though, because it's like you're almost going to get open world, like you're so close. Which then, if anyone has not seen the secret ending to episode Yuffie, they continue that cock tease even more, and it's really, really funny. Of like, we're just going to keep going, showing you the world, get you right next to the first town you go to in Final Fantasy VII, and then pull you away, just to make it even more mean. But like, they know what they're doing. And I think it's much less kind of going back from a haha, we're trying to make more money scheme, and just from a we're trying to make the best Final Fantasy VII we can with today's technology.
I think if they didn't specify that, hey, it's not going to be the full game, I think I would have been more disappointed, but because I knew that was going to be the point, I didn't.
The one weird point of contention with that is I love how they went out and they've told us ahead of time that it's multiple parts. I think the one issue I come from, and I'm not even one of those people looking at the next thing of even they don't even know how many parts it is yet. They're working on part 2 and they have no idea how many parts it's going to be. I'd rather it be that than be like, we have to finish by 2 or we have to finish by 3 parts. The weird little contention I have is I don't like that it doesn't convey it in the title. I would have liked even if they just did something hilariously dumb, like call it Final Fantasy VII Remake Disc 1. Like, just call it something that, because if you're looking at the box of Final Fantasy VII, or if you're downloading it, the PlayStation Store is not going to tell you, hey, this is just up until Midgar. Because they're showing you the Sephiroth. They're showing you the characters you expect. Like, if you describe this game and be like, hey, the final boss is Sephiroth and this big, awesome cosmic battle, you're like, oh, dang, dude, it's like the whole game. Like, not yet. It's close, but not yet. I will say, though, the last thing kind of talking about the lengths and the part of it all that I really liked is, for me, doing pretty much almost everything I could in the first playthrough, this took me about, I think it was almost 35 to 40 hours. Like, it's a really chunky game if you want to like get through with everything. Was there anyone here who maybe had issue with the length, wanted it to be like longer, or thought it felt shorter? Okay, you all are very, very much in agreement with me. I appreciate it. So yeah, the other things with it is kind of going back to what I said before of the original writers, directors, producers all wanting to just do it themselves because they're still alive, they're still at Square Enix, and Nomura can't just make Kingdom Hearts forever. He's got to go back to doing something else. So we have our returning cast members by my lovely PNGs over here. I just kind of want to get like the room's opinion, talk about it a little bit. I love how everybody looks. And I'm in a weird camp of I probably should have given a little bit of preference for this. I'm actually pretty fair when it comes to talking about original Final Fantasy VII nostalgia. I grew up loving 8 more than any of the original PlayStation trilogies, which I know is sacrilege, but I am a trash 8 fan. But 7 for me was kind of in third place. If I loved 9, and 7 was like, I like the idea of it, but I could, even as a kid, I saw a lot of its kind of like messier tendencies of like, it felt like when you're playing through original 7, you're seeing how there's like 19 different character models for everything. Like it was a rough first attempt, but a really good one. And there's a reason why it's so nostalgic. But going into Remake, what I thought was so funny was I clicked with the characters in the story way more than I ever had. Way more with Advent Children, way more with Crisis Core, definitely more than Dirge of Cerberus for whatever that's worth. And in like ways that I thought was interesting, of Cloud didn't feel like, oh, I'm trying to be every other Cloud. Cloud felt like what you kind of want and what you sort of expect with it. Barrett was never overly preachy and annoying, but he still had that like gruff sensibility of like, hey, almost to a fault, I want to accomplish my goal for my cause and everything. Tifa, I think they nailed without overly sexualizing as much as possible, which is also funny, especially for all the people who might remember the dumb Tifa has smaller boobs controversy. It's like, look at her racked. Like, this game is still very focused on giving you fan service, even if it's not as PlayStation 1 graphic-y as possible. Yuffie's redesign, I don't know how anyone doesn't love her Moogle hood. It's like the cutest thing ever, and I don't know why they haven't sold it yet. Sephiroth hilariously seems like the least changed, but I think Sephiroth is kind of like, you can't really mess with Sephiroth just because of how iconic he is. And Aerith, sort of similar like with Cloud, of like different enough. Like, I liked Aerith not feeling like Aerith was more than a flower girl, for one. She felt like more than a sacrificial lamb. She felt like someone who had a life before Cloud met her. Like, I feel like in the original story of 7, Aerith is almost like a means to an end as a person. Whereas in Final Fantasy VII Remake, Aerith, like, you meet her mom, you feel her life. Like, she has that relationship with the Turks. Like, you get to learn and care about Aerith without knowing any of her history through Zack, or even because of Zack, which is so interesting. But what did you guys think of how they portrayed all the original characters again with Remake? Yeah. Yeah.
I played both the original all the way to like 100%, but I like how the emotions played a lot better and how a lot more background was given to the character.
Yeah, like, honestly, I'd say outside of like character design nostalgia, I think Cloud and Sephiroth are always like kind of up there for like most popular in the series just because of how popular 7 is. But for me, the story that we were always kind of given with Cloud, I felt never really gave him like the best light. Like my favorite Cloud story up until 7 Remake was the Before Crisis OVA and Kingdom Hearts, if we want to count that, which isn't even that good of a interpretation of him. But yeah, something about this just felt really, really good of like, they never felt like they were just kind of copying and pasting of each other, while also still, I was always surprised at a story I had already heard before, which was really, really nice. Now, when I say new cast, even though I have like 4 people here who are still in the original game, I have to give like shout to that this game is like, hey, we're going to bring in characters like Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge and Zack that are nothing like the original characters. Now, with the Avalanche crew... Oh, yep. Well, not only even that, but I'm just like in the sense of I never heard anyone care about Avalanche before Remake. No one cared about Avalanche. No one talked about the inner politics of Avalanche as a group. Like no one was like, oh, well, what about the real Avalanche as opposed to the Splinter Cell? Or like, let's talk about like that one time Jesse said, "Let's go through the door, big guy." No one really cared about him, but the funniest things now is like I feel like Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge, I have multiple friends now who love each of them for so many different reasons. Like honestly, for me, Wedge is like top 3 Remake characters for me. He is just so wholesome. I mean, his cats. I don't know how you play that game and don't love Wedge's cats. They're fantastic. Jesse is... If you had told me before Remake came out last year that Jesse would like rival Tifa and Aerith like discussions, I would not have believed you. I'm like, dude, no one's gonna like simp for Jesse. People are simping hard for Jesse. Jesse has her own figures now with like like the fact that like Square Enix like cares enough to make merch for Jesse blows my mind. Zach, obviously we know a lot less with, but kind of going back to what you were saying about him being alive, I love that that's not answered. I love that that's still in question even after episode Yuffie's DLC. Now, if anyone here has beaten the game, we do see Zack a little bit more after that post-ending thing for it, and it is just like the perfect tease of we still don't know where he is. Is it after the ending of the game? We're going to get into spoilers a little later in the panel, but I love that Zack is this, like, he's this infinite question of you can have an infinite amount of conversations about him because the game doesn't explain it and it doesn't have to yet, which I love. So that's like, as opposed to thinking like, oh, what are they going to do for part 2? Instead of the question being how far in the story will we get, now the question is, what story do we get? Part 2 could be its own story, but part 2 could just be a continuation because they haven't committed to one way or the other, which I really appreciate. And I know not many people have actually played episode Yuffie here. Who was the other person who had played episode Yuffie? You in the back, I hope you will agree with me. I love Sonon so much more than I would have ever thought. And I'm like, you all need to prepare yourself. You will cry for Sonon in ways you were not ready for. And he's just such an awesome character. Great AI component, plays great, super fun, great voice acting, great like good design. Like adding more like background not only to the world with Yuffie and the Wutai, but it was like something I didn't even know I needed of like, because honestly they could have just had episode Yuffie just be Yuffie playing with herself. Like she's powerful enough, she doesn't really need anyone to kind of tag along with her in the story, but it fits and it complements each other so well. And I hope people actually know who Whitey Weishead is over here. Any Dirge of Service people, were you excited when you heard he was coming back?
I was confused.
I was going to be more confusion over anything, but I will say, at least after seeing the Dirge of Cerberus connection a little bit more in episode Yuffie, they explain it, thankfully. They actually get a lot more into the Shinra connection, which is funny because actually there's no Hojo at all in it at all. We get a lot more kind of different angles of it because I feel like even in the base game, the little bit you get with Hojo, I say a little bit, his chapter feels like the longest in the entire game, but his section feels kind of very much like different than the rest of the time you're fighting Shinra, even by comparison of Rufus or anyone else in there for it. But it leads to a lot of like really fun potential for it without needing any experience. Like, you won't need to play Dirge of Cerberus to understand Weiss and all the other like weird misfits as opposed to like the like underground characters. So where did we leave off? As I say, I'm not going to spoil anything, but these are like the last 3 shots of episode Yuffie, but they also literally tell you nothing. So right now in the story, we are left off with characters like this. The main squad in the top right corner here just got to their first town. If I'm remembering right, it's Calm. Calm is the first town. So we're left literally at the doorsteps of Calm. Zack, theoretically, let's just assume Zack is on the same timeline as everyone else, has made it to the church looking for Aerith, who is nowhere to be seen, and everyone is using the church for what it was actually intended as opposed to a girl's garden. And Yuffie is just waiting for you to stumble across her in a RNG battle somewhere in the woods, but is riding a chocobo, living her best life. So we're left off in a really interesting, ambiguous place of kind of going back of like, we could really go anywhere for here. So I kind of want to ask you all here if anyone has like any ideas or things like actually, especially if you don't want to see, where are you hoping we pick off from? When it starts up, are you wanting it to just be immediately right into the action with Cloud? Are you wanting something like a Metal Gear Solid 2 where you play the rest of the game from Zack's perspective? Do you want to keep being twist and turned? Or does anyone have any kind of like ideas they want to put out there or worries or whatever? Oh my god. If Zack gets to just be the Laguna of part 2, I will be very happy. More Laguna, please. Oh, say it again? No, yeah. There are like the fun story and nightmare scenario fantasies with 8, especially when you get into the time thing for it. Here are our lovely cats, as talked about earlier. So theory time. I don't know who here has been going too deep down the rabbit hole. Who here is aware of the Final Fantasy VII Advent Children theory connection for 7 Remake? All right, so I'm about to sound like a really insane person here. So, if you all remember at the top left over here, these guys were like the arbiters, or I forget their specific name for it, but basically someone had a sword, someone had a gun, and someone used their fist. And the immediate thing would have just been like, oh, it's Cloud, Barrett, and Tifa. Fist, sword, guns. Totally makes perfect sense. It's going back off of what's going on. But if you want to be a big old dumb conspiracy theory like myself, you can remember these 3 F-boys over here. The remnants of Sephiroth from Advent Children. I'm probably going to forget their names. It was like Kadaj, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, so their whole thing where they were the remnants of Sephiroth from Advent Children. And their analogies with weapons were one used their fist, one had guns, and the other had a big old sword to use. And it fits so much perfectly, well, fits perfectly in tinfoil hat conspiracy times of, instead of saying this story of Final Fantasy VII is just regular Final Fantasy VII, this is Sephiroth coming back in time after losing in Advent Children to try and take it all over and correct things the way he wants it to be. So it's not going to be history repeating itself. He's using elements and he's using his knowledge not only from Final Fantasy VII, but from all of those other games that happened after, from the movie with Advent Children, from all of that other previous experience. Hell, they could probably be dumb and include his Kingdom Hearts stuff and make that canon. They can be as crazy as they want with it. But the whole point of it is also going back to those ghosts or the Whisperers specifically, is that if you pay attention to all their use in it, the ghosts only appear when the story is going off the walls and, hey, this was not in the original game. Like looking at situations like the beginning with the bar, or very much more explicitly like at the end with Barrett almost dying and stuff like that, and having this huge fight with Genova and all of these crazy things happening of like, these are all of the basically fanboys and fan ghosts in the world trying to stop Final Fantasy VII Remake from ruining itself. They are collectively using all of their forces to stop Nomura from making this weird... Actually, I shouldn't say Nomura. This is all a Katase thing, because Katase is the writer. And what's so funny about it is I love stuff like this. I love self-aware, timey-wimey. Like, this is, like, right out of, like, a Doctor Who plot, and I'm, like, all here for it. Of, like... It's a reboot that's a sequel that's aware that it's trying and failing to be a reboot remake of the original. And what's so great about it is, like, none of my ideas, as batshit insane as they really are, they could just as easily all be right as they are wrong, which makes me so excited about it, because even if all this ends up not being true, there's no connection to Advent Children and everything with it, I just think it's so interesting of, hey... Let's make this a really good game and still mess with fans who are of the original. Yeah.
This is like a Metal Gear Solid 5, if I didn't think you gave an air, voice acting.
Perfect. Yeah, and I mean, honestly, you can go back to that as well. Why is the voice cast different in English? It's a sequel. It's not technically a remake, blah, 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 stuff like that. So it would make sense for that in those cases. But one thing I did want to ask you guys, if anyone has any thoughts for it, because I feel like the opinion's a little bit more mixed with it. People out there who might not have enjoyed the ending of 7 for, like, not where it left off, but kind of how it did it as a story. Does anyone kind of want to elaborate of, like, why the ending kind of upset you? Because I feel like that last fight with Sephiroth to cut off the Whispers and to really kind of almost metaphorically break free of the continuity shackles. Like, was anyone, like, just hard out by that, didn't really like it for it, or is anyone in, like, the camp of, like, thought it just totally didn't work? So you guys are all universally enjoyed the ending of 7, thought 2 thumbs up? Yeah.
I think it's going to take time to see where they go with it. I'm not 100% sold on it right now. I'm one of, like, I mean, I've been a Final Fantasy fan since the beginning, and I'm one of the ones who's like, just give me better graphics, give me some more side content, keep everything else the exact same. I love what they did with it. It blew me away. But I'm still not 100% sold on the idea of a quote sequel-ish kind of thing. But I'm obviously going to stay along with the ride and play.
What do you think would have made you a more on board? Is there something that they could have done in the confinements of keeping it to Midgar that would have maybe sold you harder?
Not have made it like, so what you were saying about the ghosts and everything coming through, they were more annoying than anything else. Like, every time they showed up, I was like, oh my god, you're in my way.
Yeah, they're like the worst thing to fight, but I almost, like, it then goes back to, like, it makes too much sense. Like, make them as annoying as possible, because then this is me just, again, being metaphorically complaining, like, guy. It's like, think about the ghosts as, again, the fans online. They are annoying, they're in your way, you're just trying to progress, but if you push through this stupid annoyance and all this shit, like, talk online about what it should be or what it has to be, you are giving yourself a much more open and free ending. So, like, kind of going back to, like, that traditional ending shot. If I actually go back to the very first shot here, which is the last shot from the original game, that shot of the world, their possibilities are open to anything it could be, which then also makes it a little bit where they immediately go to the same town from 7, but it's a CG cutscene, so I give a little bit more of a pass. But I think it's like, if it's not that, it almost kind of makes you more worried of, like, okay, then why include the ghost? Because especially if they end it. I think the fact that it has a satisfying ending, or at least it attempts at an ending with the ghost, because I think if the ghost was an ever-present thing through the whole series, like, no. Like you can't have that through multiple games as, like, a constant annoyance. It'd be like, imagine if every Resident Evil game had to have Nemesis. He's cool because he's in Nemesis. You don't need him in every other game.
I honestly, the reason I'm just going to stick with it, though, is mainly the battle system. I was not sold when they first announced it and talked about what it was going to be. I love my, ATV stuff from classic days. And when it came out, I was on board.
Were you sold with the battle upon the demo or in the full game?
Both, honestly. I love the demo, and then the game just improved upon it and made it better. So
The demo, yeah, kind of getting into the gameplay, because this is definitely more of a story-focused thing, but I think the gameplay is a really interesting aspect of this, because who here by chance played the demo before they played the main game? I think that demo is a really great tease for the game, because it's just the beginning. It's not like it's giving you that truncated experience, but the best part that I think about Final Fantasy VII Remake's gameplay... Now, to be fair, I've only played the action section. I've not tried the command version, because I like that it's there, but it's a little more simplified than enough to really kind of tempt me in it. But I think the best part about Final Fantasy VII Remake's battle system is, like, when you get to that... I think most would probably agree Hell House. When you get to Hell House, you're like, all right, I have to be good at this battle system. Like, you cannot just mash your way through Hell House and all of their complexities with everything. And when I started learning that, like, when I was, like, 10 hours into this game, and I'm like, oh, my God, like, you can, like, really combo off people and start making your commands matter. Like, it plays like an action game, but it is so deep when you start really micromanaging your hotkeys and your triggers for everything. Of like, it almost gave me, like, going back to 14, it almost gave me, like, micromanaging, like, satisfaction levels of, like, I'm commanding Tifa and Barrett and everyone else without even having to switch over and play as them if I don't want to, which was so nice. Yeah. Surprisingly, I think I made it through on my first try, but literally I think it took me 35 minutes to beat Madhouse on my first attempt, because I was like, I think I had a really bad magic build for who I went in there with and wasn't really doing the right thing at the time. I was doing that max out your weapon right away to then go back to your main. Max out your weapon right away, and I had, like, just before starting that Coliseum, had started a weapon I wasn't super in love with, and the build wasn't awesome, but I was like, oh, I can mash through it, I'll be fine. Like, I still need to actually get through it on hard. Like, if you liked the battle system in 7, play it on hard. It's a completely separate game. Oh, yeah, like, because the biggest change, if you guys remember, the whole thing with hard is, it's no items, which is like, oh, well, I'll just heal. Until you realize super limited mana and super limited use with your ATB fields. Yeah, because what's the thing you have to, like, it's, what is it, faith? It's like immediately the first thing you have to start doing is faith, just so you can start healing everybody. But yeah, I have not finished it on hard yet, just because the way I play, because I play so many different games and so many different series, like, it's on, like, my back burner if I'm going to 100% it one of these days. Like, I love Final Fantasy 15. I've played all of 15's content, but I still haven't platinumed it, even though I know it's a doable thing to do, but it's just a lot of grinding. I can only catch so many fish in my time. So, another thing I kind of wanted to ask, going back to this for the future of it, do we really want it to be a 1-for-1? And what I mean by that is, like, I think when you look at moments like 7 that really stand out, like, what are, like, if you guys, like, have a special, like, I think, especially for 7 Remake, it's really easy to have, like, oh my God, this is, like, my one moment I really loved in it. Like, for me, and this was really, really kind of surprising to me because the original didn't really, like, fill me with, like, that much joy. But for whatever reason, I have such a nostalgic feeling of the bike sequence at the end. Like, that bike sequence is, like, it gets your blood pumping, which is funny because the first one is already really, really good, especially with, like, the boss fight and everything going on with it. But the game is, like, full of moments that kind of get you really excited, whether it be checking out, like, the world. Like, and it's so funny, like, I think it's like chapter 1 or chapter 2, like, once you get down to the slums and you look at the town, I legit had, like, my breath got taken away when I looked up on the camera in the skybox of just the whole city of Midgard above you. And it's like, oh my God, like, because it's so much more real when you look at it of, like, these people literally just live above a giant dumpster pizza. And it's just foreboding and always around them. The only time they get, like, sun is when it's halfway across, like, the city above them. Like, the world of Final Fantasy VII and Midgar is so interesting, even in Remake, and we barely get a look at the city. Most of the time when we're in the city is, like, we're sneaking around a suburb or the city's on fire and you're trying to escape. Like, we barely even know what the upside of Midgard's day-to-day life is like. And already in Remake, it gives us, like, such an interesting kind of, like, look of it. Like, that's why almost one of my favorite things with it, even though it's not open world. Really, I love when you kind of get to that certain point. I think it's like right before the wall falls, and you have all of Midgar, Wall Market. No, you have the slums, Wall Market, and Aerith's was like Sector 7 or Sector 8 or something, and you can just run from one end to the other. Is it just a bunch of corridors? Yeah. But the fact that, like, it's connected, you see, like, the construction areas. Like, it feels like a world, even though it's a whole bunch of hallways, which also, shout out to the team who makes this, because I feel like people don't talk about this enough. Do you guys know the team who made Final Fantasy VII Remake is the Final Fantasy 13 team? So if you ever hear people like dogging on 13, just remember, like, they can make some really good stuff, and this is coming from someone who is a really big simp for the 13 trilogy. But yeah, for you guys though, like, did you guys have like one moment that maybe like made you surprised how much you enjoyed it more in the remake, or were surprised how faithful it was to the original? Well, yeah, I think another thing I wish I'd almost made its own slide for, because I feel like it really deserves it. What is the one thing those early JRPGs had on everything in like the 90s? A bunch of bullshit minigames you never played more than once or twice. So it's like, oh yeah, they're going to cut all of those from 7 remakes. Like, who even remembers the remakes in Midgar or whatever, like for what's there? And the fact that they tripled down on the remakes, they made so many, not because, oh, let's pad it out or let's make it fill. It's like, no, like adding in 3 different minigames to the gym is adding to that world on top of everything. Adding that Coliseum added so much flavor and personality. Like, I can't, like, even something as tiny as the commentators. Like, the guys commentating when you're fighting in the arena adds so much life and so much personality to it. It goes back to the whole thing of, they didn't just make the world pretty again, they made it more of an actual world, which was so fun. And so that gives me, like, so much more hope of, like, if for just this intro, we have such a good wealth of mini-games, optional things, even, there's a game that's just us beating up boxes. That should suck. But, like, something like that was even fun to, like, they just made it. They just gave us other versions of it, and it was fun. And even if all of them weren't like a 10 out of 10, because I think, what was it? The pull-up one. It's either the pull-up or the squats. Like, there's the one by the time you have to do it with Tifa. It's like, man, I really love this as a dumb minigame, but it is very precise. And had to go for, like, I just love when games are like, we don't need to include this, but every time it's in there, it just makes it so much better. Like, even looking at stuff like, did they need to make a rhythm game just for the Honeybee Inn? Definitely not. Is that one of the most, like, breathtaking moments in the game because it has no reason to be in there? 1,000%. Like, I think that, like, literally, they could have just had the Honeybee Inn. Like, they could have even cut the Honeybee Inn. Like, but what was great is, like, they've talked about it before of, like, no, like, that's one of those iconic moments of, like, if Cloud was not cross-dressing in this game, people would have been like, oh, man, it's censored. This sucks. It's too woke. But no, like, they found a way to literally make Wall Market more funny, more, like, outlandish, and, like, straight up included, like, a hand job simulator joke at one point. Like, yeah, speaking of, like, the stuff that they do to this game is just so funny of, like, they, like, it's like the definition of you're stretching something thin and it just is, like, losing its flavor halfway through for, like, a piece of gum maybe. But for whatever magic they did over at Square Enix and stuff, it's like, for me, it was like beginning, middle to end still felt like a full meal experience of, like, exciting, surprising, and even when, like, the game warned you at the end, like, at around, like, chapter 11 or 12 or something, when it's like, hey, you can't come back, make sure these side quests are done. Which, by the way, shout out to the side quest. Outside of, like, the new girl, I think her name was, like, Kyrie or something, or, like, the random, like, other girl and stuff, for the most part, all the side quests I really, really enjoyed. Like, the one with the old lady was really, really interesting. Oh my god, the one, and I'm so mad I'm forgetting the guy's name, with your Don Canero's lackey, he's looking for his girlfriend or like his girlfriend's pendant. I loved that one of like having to like go and search for everything. Like all of these like side characters I should not care a second of. Like no one remembers the cowboy from Wall Market before 2020. But like I remember so many of like the entire cast in so many more deep ways than I would have ever thought, and it was just so crazy and so funny. But yeah, so that is pretty much it of me rambling, talking about the thing. But I hope you guys are as excited for the next part of Final Fantasy VII Remake as I am. I don't expect to hear from it soon because praise be, we're still living in this nightmare world of pandemic goodness, but we've got a Final Fantasy XIV expansion coming out this year. That's going to fill people out. We hopefully have 16 coming next year. If we get 16 in part 2 next year, I will probably go into a overdose comatose, but I think it'll be optimistic to expect it maybe announced this year for part 2. Honestly, especially because with Intergrade, I've started a new playthrough with it just from the beginning because they added so many specific PS5 features with the controller, and actually running in 6K it does feel like a completely different game. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I was in the Kingdom Hearts panel, and she asked us what we thought would come out first.
I'm so sorry. I am that guy.
I feel familiar.
It's okay. Us white guys with brown hair, man, we really just blend in. Let me tell you.
So, yeah, you asked that question, so it's probably the same group, but you want to ask it?
Yeah, for sure. So, forgive me if I'm wrong, but if anyone here has any Kingdom Hearts ties or whatever, what do you think is more likely? Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 releases first, or the next Kingdom Hearts game releases first? I made a huge mistake. Hold your hand up if you think Remake Part 2 is going to happen first. Okay. All right. I hope that's the case. I'm definitely way more hungry for 7-2 than I would be for this. Oh, God, I hope they call it Final Fantasy VII Remake 2. That'd be so great. Just to make it like they have to do like the 10-2 thing where it's 7-2 just to really like go in for it. Give Cloud dress spheres, go all in. Include everything in there for it. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, things you want to like throw out there, the floors are still pretty much for like another 15 minutes, but feel free to not have to be for. You had your hand in the back? It's okay. If I didn't say it, I would have regretted it. You had your hand? If we get Cloud in a single dress sphere, I'll be happy. Because if 7 Remake has taught me anything, is that Cloud pulls off any dress way better than I would have ever given him credit for. Well, because I think that's almost like a bit of like the hard part of like I think you almost get to a point of like, especially with Final Fantasy, when referencing something is like, are you referencing it seriously or are you referencing it kind of as a joke? It'd be like, I think if you included like a Final Fantasy Tactics reference, it's like, all right, be careful. Those fans have been very hungry for a very long time. If you want to make fun of like triple triad, go for it. Those guys, they're ready for it.
Go full circle though, because the guy who created the dress spheres is Shimmer, and they said that was right.
Oh, God, that is true. There is a 10 tie to 7, and in Remake, it doubles down on it anymore. Actually, I will say this, because I know no one here has really played it besides Cool Guy in the corner. Everybody, we're talking about minigames, don't skip on Fort Condor. Fort Condor is the new minigame they add in episode Yuffie. It is literally good enough to be its own game. Like, I don't even want to show it, because if I show it, it's going to look like a weird mobile game. They basically made Clash of Clans not suck in its Final Fantasy VII. So you have automated units coming up the hills. It's three sides, so you have 3 lanes going. Your opponents, and the best part is you're Yuffie playing this in-world. It's in-world RP. Yuffie is playing against everyone else. So she can play against Jessie. She can play against Wedge. She can even play against, like, Roche. Like, she can play against pretty much everybody she runs into. And it's like, so satisfying. I will be amazed if Square Enix doesn't try to, like, make it its own game. Like, it is that deep. Like, you build your deck. It's not like a predetermined deck. You have to go around making your own pieces. You're collecting them in the world, winning them off of others, building up different deck styles. And again, also, I feel bad I didn't bring this up for it. Final Fantasy VII Remake is like easily the best soundtrack of the year last year. Whether you loved the game, it was like one of the best soundtracks I'd ever heard in my entire life. 7 literally has a better soundtrack. Oh, you know what? Just to show this point, because we've got YouTube up, most people probably don't remember this, but there is a bar, like a Wutai bar, called like the Happy Turtle, and every Happy Turtle location in this little DLC is like there's one side quest that's like, hey, find our flyers for the Happy Turtle. And you're like, oh, okay. It's just a collectathon thing. It can't be that hard. They made a song for every flyer. Like they didn't like, oh, we made a 7-second jingle. Every one of these songs you're about to see for each flyer is like a 2 to 3 minute song in a different genre. So this young, kind, awesome man tells you, go find my flyers, I'll give you something good. And then you're running all around the slums of Sector 7, and you're looking for the music of the Happy Turtle jingle. So ranging from rock, pop, jazz, it's like the most wholesome, awesome thing I can like ever possibly say. I'm going to try and find, like, easily the best one. No, this is not the best one, but it's at least the cringiest one. It's a good place to end on. We'll do the death metal one. Happy Turtle death metal. Oh, no, not reactions. We're not giving this person the satisfaction. Here we go. Gonna get fully wrecked at the Happy Turtle. Probably not actually 6 minutes long. This is a whole song the sound team made for an optional quest in an optional DLC that they did not have to make. It's so good. And by the way, the rest of episode Yuffie has new songs, and it's also a certified bop. Yes.
Does anyone else hear System of a Down?
Watch it probably be. They just like went and hired them. I would believe you. So yeah, Happy Turtle, can't recommend enough. Awesome soundtrack. It keeps getting better. Like, it's at least good that it wasn't like a fluke, which would have been like really sad. And just because I'm a sucker for it, I think this one, if I remember right, was easily my favorite. The Oldies remix. They're all like basically the same lyrics. It's just saying, come to our bar, go get drunk. But yeah, this seems like a pretty good like song to like end it on for. Thank you guys all so much for coming and listening to me ramble for like 50 minutes. I hope you enjoyed it. If you grabbed a poster, thank you for taking it off my hands. Yes, go play Final Fantasy some more, whether it be 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and play 14. Because not enough people are playing the most popular MMORPG in the whole world. Goodbye, you guys.